As we pick up from the previous chapter, we head over to the southern front lines of the Revich observation base. It was a fortress built atop a rocky mountain, surrounded by cliffs from a range of 100 to 300 meters tall. The only gate into the base was an incline from the northwest, with a winding steep slope filled with twists and turns. As Vika showed Lena and her group around the base, they climbed up the observation tower stairway to the residential sector to be greeted by Ludmila, who is another siren, who was also followed by other sirens, which Lena noticed that they're all women. So Vika tells her that making them men would just feel disgusting, which Lena gave him a cold gaze before Vika tells her it's just a joke. But was it really? Since making them all women actually helps them differentiate the sirens from the other soldiers, because most people on the front lines were men, and the only other features that separated them was the quasi-nerve crystal on their forehead. After getting introduced to the other sirens, Shin goes to the cafeteria to reunite with the other members of the strike package that didn't go to the capital. They talk about the sirens, and we find out that their handlers don't like people talking about them as if they're objects. They treated them like human beings, which is kind of the opposite of how things were in the Republic, as the 86s were humans, but were treated as objects. Later on, Lena came to visit Vika's room late at night to gather some information that she specifically doesn't want Shin to hear about, which Vika sends Lerche to get Shin to come over and act as Lena's guard. Lena wanted to know if Shin and Frederica's Esper ability harms the user that possesses them, which he says no, and for an Esper, that ability should be as natural to them as their 5 senses. Then Vika questions Lena that what if it did have an adverse effect on the user? What would she do then? And why didn't she bring Shin with her, since it does involve his health? Which she claims that regardless of what the answer was, Shin would not leave the battlefield, and eventually would grind himself into nothing. Vika responds, going on another monologue, calling her arrogant, and he starts disrespecting her motherland at the same time, and if it bothers her that much, she should try speaking to Shin about it. They also start talking about the raid device, and that if the strain gets too much, it could damage the user's brain and influence their mind, and maybe other adverse effects on the user, which Lena uses the raid device pretty often, and usually with a lot of people at the same time, but that's a risk Lena is willing to take. But she might not have to anymore, because Vika might have a solution to this problem. He sends Lerche to bring him something known as the Cicada. It is a thought support device developed for the siren handlers to ease the strain of sensory resonance. Lena asks Vika if he uses it too, and he tells her, what would having a man wear this achieve? Which Lena didn't follow, and he tells her that there's a trick to putting it on, and wishes her good luck. So Lena enters the soundproof anteroom to put it on. However, as she's putting it on, she let out a scream that slightly exceeded the soundproof walls. She didn't ignore this, as she helped herself to another cup of tea. It was really loud, so Vika had to plug his ears and had to talk to Shiden by writing on a piece of paper. I forgot to mention that the Cicada is also a skin-tight suit that shows off one's curvature, and it tended to sway a lot, especially around the chest. I'm not making this up, it's written in the book. I promise everyone, this is really important to the plot. Lerche then questions Vika on why he's taking a peculiar stance, and Vika states that he doesn't want to get himself killed. If the Headless Reaper finds out about this, his head will roll, he claims. Lerche's eyes widen as she says out loud that Sir Reaper is enamored with Lady Bloody Regina. How unexpected. Then Vika and Shiden simultaneously whacked Lerche in the head, as her shame knows no bounds. In another room, Shin was sitting on top of his bed as he heard a distant voice from somewhere and asked Raiden if he heard someone scream. He felt as if it was Lena's voice, which Raiden doesn't hear anything. After a while, Lena left the anteroom with her face bright red. If Vika wasn't the prince, she would have slapped him across the cheek by now.
Oh, wow! Wow!
Vika spoke with a smile charged with a noticeable false cheerfulness. I'm glad I could be of service, Your Majesty. Lena glared daggers at Vika before giving the Cicada back to him and left with Shiden. In the hallways, Lena asked her if she was really arrogant, which Shiden tells her that she's just noticing this now. So the following day, as everyone is making preparations, Vika introduces himself to the rest of the 86 strike package with a motivational speech which none of them knew who he was. They discussed about the operation towards the Dragon Fang Mountain. The plan is to have the 1st Armor Corps to attack certain Legion positions as a diversion, drawing out their forces to create a gap for the strike package to lead the main attack towards the Dragon Fang Mountain production site. The priority of the mission is to capture a white Amaiza, the merciless queen, which was about 70 kilometers south of the base, and they wanted it alive, with the central processor intact. They begin the mission as the Spirit Squadron march through the snowy conifer forest. Lena asks Shin about the Phoenix's position, which is most likely going to be the location where the Merciless Queen is close to, and it's most likely going to be the biggest obstacle for the mission. Also, Shin's ability is a bit nerfed for the mission, as he can't detect the difference between the Legion and the Sirens, since they're both based off the dead. Then Theo and Kurina start talking shit about the Sirens in the pair raid, because to them, they were kinda creepy, like walking corpses, as she puts it. But they stopped after they realized that Shin's brother is pretty similar to them, and they didn't want to disrespect him in front of Shin on the pair raid comms, but Shin doesn't really care. While that was happening, Frederica and the rest of the strike package commanders heard all of that, as they were still connected to them. But Vika and the United Kingdom handlers couldn't hear it, since they were only connected to the Sirens. And since the observation base wasn't set up to receive Juggernaut data, they took command in Vanadis, which beside Vanadis was the Brasigaman Squadron and a modified Barushka Matushka, led by Vika, with the personal mark of a snake coiled around an apple with the identifier of Gaduka. A while ago, during the mission, the Spirit Squadron had a scheduled resonance with Lerche's Alkanos recon unit, the Chaika, and the resonance was filled with some kind of coldness that made the 86s felt disgusted by the Sirens. Lerche asked them, after giving refuge in the Federacy, why return to the battlefield? That question irritated Kurina, as she answered that they chose to fight for themselves. However, during their discussion, they get interrupted as they've been discovered by the Legion as they enter combat. The ambushing Legion were actually being launched in the air from deep within Legion territory by another unit known as the Zentors, the Catapult type Legion. However, they could only launch lightweight units like Amaizes, self-propelled mines, and Scorpions. Shin could track their movements in the air, so they were able to predict where they were being launched from, but the Legion numbers were far too great. So Vika easily suppresses the Zentors, with an artillery team stopping them from launching any more units at them. Then Shin and the Spirit Squadron had no problem taking out their current enemies in front of them, and Vika was surprised with Shin's combat abilities. Everything is going as planned, so Lena asks Vika, why is Lerche the only Siren that looks exactly like a human, since she doesn't have a quasi-nerve crystal embedded on her forehead, and she wasn't stored away when they weren't in battle? Vika tells her he's not answering that. As the battle is going on, Raiden and Shin notice that the Siren's fighting style is pretty reckless, as they would stall the enemy out before making a suicidal charge at them with no hesitation, like they accepted that they were expendable. Then Lerche, noticing Shin's amazing combat abilities, asks him if he would discard his human body to gain greater combat prowess, since humans have many functions that are disadvantageous in battle compared to machines, which were optimized for battle, which Shin went silent. After the battle was over, Shin came across the wreckage of Alkanost and found Ludmila in pretty bad condition. As Shin was rescuing her, she told Shin she wishes to fight on the battlefield. However, Shin could hear the ghost within her crying out a different wish. As Anju and Dustin finish up their objective on a nearby cliff, they begin to head back. However, self-propelled mines were buried beneath them, as they detonated one after another, and the strip of land they stood on collapsed, and they were swept away in the river below. As they got out of the water, they were still wet and cold. The sun was setting, so they needed to find some shelter quick. They didn't have many options, as the Juggernauts are out of energy, and the Paragrade couldn't work at the temperatures they were in, as touching them could cause frostbite. Fortunately for them, they found a small log cabin, but they were still stranded. While this was happening, back at the Revich Citadel Base, Lena sent out a search party to go find them, and Frederica, using her ability, can somewhat locate where they were, but couldn't get their exact location. Back at the lodge, Anju and Dustin were able to start a fire, and they converse about why Dustin volunteered to join the strike package. He tells her that he's an Alba, but born from the Empire, and since the Republic was sending anyone from the Empire to the internment camps, Dustin should have been included. However, he was spared because his family was Alba. Anju went silent, but soon made a small sneeze, and Dustin heard that and gave his blanket to her. She coiled up her wet hair so she wouldn't get the blanket wet. As she was doing that, Dustin caught a glimpse of the scar on her back. It read, Hor's daughter. He instinctively asked her if she wanted to get it removed, and Anju gave him an unpleasant smile. He tells her it's not like the scar has any sentimental value, so she doesn't have to force herself to bear it. She tells him that he's right, and that she'll have to remove it if she wants to wear open back dresses, and she wanted to try wearing a bikini too. Then Dustin, with the balls of steel, asks if there's anyone she'd like to see her in a bikini. Anju jokingly responds, saying, "Why do you ask? What, Dustin? Do you like me or something?" Dustin held his tongue for a moment and spat the words out half in desperation. "Yeah, I do. Got a problem with that?" And that's when he starts confessing his feelings for her, taking this opportunity to tell her everything. He says she's pretty, she always looks out for him, even though he's an Alba, and that it would be weird if he didn't start liking her. Which Anju tells him she's honored, but she can't fall in love anymore, because she loved someone once, and that she loved him to the very end. And no matter who she falls in love with, she will never forget him, and would always compare him to the other, so it would be wrong for her to fall in love with anyone. Which Dustin tells her she's wrong, and if she continues to compare him to others, she'll never be happy. He continues, "So even if you can't forget him, even as you remember him, I think you're allowed to find new things to love. At the very least, I'd never expect you to forget him." He looked back at her, into her blue eyes, the color of the highest point in the heavens. "I came to get you guys, but it looks like I'm interrupting something." As soon as Shin said that, Dustin and Anju bolted away from each other. Shin was looking down at them with an incredibly cold glare, a glare Anju had never seen Shin give in all the years she'd known him. He continues, "You two look like you're doing just fine. Sorry for ruining the mood." She asked him how long he's been there, and Shin paused to think before answering with, "Bikini." Anju shrieked, and Shin tells Fido they didn't need their help, and they're leaving. As a joke, of course, Shin gave them some fresh clothes, but as Dustin was about to accept it from Shin, he slammed it against his face with a merciless full force pitch, saying that it was from Daya, and that if Dustin makes her cry, he'll feed him to the Legion in his place. Anju's face went red again as she tells him that she hasn't fell in love with Dustin, but Shin stops her to tell her that it's been 2 years since Daya passed away. He wouldn't want her to stay chained up like this. Also, Shin kept the raid device on this entire time, so everyone in the search party overheard everything starting from the bikini part. Back at the base, Lena and Vika got the news that Dustin and Anju were safe, and they talk about how it was suspicious that the Legion had self-propelled mines planted in the terrain as traps, only detonating on their retreat, as if it was to lure them into the Legion territories and trap them behind the enemy lines. So Vika decides to call for reinforcements. In the case anyone gets trapped on the battlefield, they'll be able to rescue them. Later during the night, Shin connected his residence with Lena and asked her to come out with him for a bit. He was at the top of the observation tower, about several hundred meters from the surface of the ground. Shin could smell the scent of Lena's perfume as she came up. She asked him why did he call her to come here. However, before she could finish asking him, a wow of amazement escaped her lips, as it was a dazzling, beautiful, starry night. Since the sun was down, the night sky was clear of the Antagsfliege. Shin tells her about how she spoke to Kai back at the 86th district, about how she wanted to see a starry night, and that's what he wanted to show her. Lena smiled, reminiscing about the days of the 86th district, and snuck a glance at Shin, who was contemplating something. She wanted to know about the scar, but she doesn't intend to ask him about it, and it would be better that Shin opens up about it himself. Even though they only knew each other's faces recently, Lena still thought, somewhere in her heart, they understood each other on a deeper level. They somehow called each other's name at the same time, but Shin decided to let Lena speak first. Lena apologizes about their argument back in the epilogue of the last volume, and that she went a little too far, but her stance on what she said hasn't changed. She continues, saying that the reason she thinks they've given up on the world is because they're all just that kind. She tells Shin that he's a kind person, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't have carried the memories and the names of all those who have died. He wouldn't have tried to free his brother, Kaie, and all the comrades who were stolen from the Legion, and same with the other 86s, because choosing hate and turning against the Republic would be easier, and pinning all the blame to them would be simpler. But their pride as an 86 was to never become as despicable as their oppressors. She wanted to see their kindness rewarded, but the human world isn't made that way as of right now, but she wants it to be that way. Shin was silent as he thought Lena's ideal world would never come true, but something came to Shin's mind. He had to drum up the courage to bring it up again. What was it he called her here to say before they set out for the Dragon Fang Mountain operation? Because you never know, this could be one of the last opportunities he gets to speak to Lena. He tells her, Lena, if the Federacy and the United Kingdom suspect that the Merciless Queen is Major Zelene Birkenbaum, and she knows some method of stopping the war, if the war is really going to end, when that happens, suddenly, his words cut off, but his inner monologue keeps going. Let's go to the sea. If possible, let's go and see something we've never seen before. Together. He wants to show her the sea. That is his reason for fighting. But as he was about to say that, self-doubt rose from Shin's heart, like soap bubbles freezing in his throat. His inner monologue keeps going. I want to show you the sea. Not a battlefield where I die without truly accomplishing anything. I want to show you something other than this world, ravaged as it is by the fires of war. I can finally wish for this, but then what? What comes after I show her the sea? What would Lena wish for then? What would she let me wish for then? And how long would it last? Shin himself didn't wish to see the sea. There was nothing he wanted for himself, and the emptiness of that was incomprehensible to him. He reflexively stopped thinking about it, but the doubt lingered. To fight is the pride of the 86. But if that was the case, if they were to fight on and survive. And on that note, we finish chapter 2, Citadel of the Swans. Will Shin ever tell Lena what he wants to show her? Will Dustin and Anju ever get together? Will Shin ever find out about the cicada? Is Zelene really the Merciless Queen? What's going on in Legion territory? Some of these questions have been answered. I'm not going to say which ones. If you want these answers, I strongly encourage you to read the light novels if you haven't done so already, or you can wait for the next season whenever that happens. And if you want me to continue the story, be sure to subscribe and like the video because that will stimulate my dopamine receptors, which may increase my motivation for making the next part. Also, since the last upload, I was at like 69 subscribers, which is nice I guess, but we are close to double that amount at the time of this recording. And firstly, welcome to anyone that's new here. I'm curious to know where everyone is coming from, but I love all you guys and I hope everyone stays healthy and be well.